all right? Now, I want to kind of give a quick bit of background on why this is happening. I'll be honest with you. A year ago, I'd had 5 people in this class. Today, we have over 30, all right? It's taking a lot more traction, and there's a lot of things that are changing that makes business model Canvas a much more viable way to look at a particular business. It's not to replace the business plan. It's an augmentation to it, and I'll tell you why that fits. So, in the old days, we told everybody, you have to write a business plan to be able to start a business. It was almost like a rite of passage. If you didn't go ahead and do a business plan, you figured you just didn't have the moxie or the what you needed to go ahead and do that. So, but the business plan today, quite frankly, I write a business blog, and a recent business blog really talked about the disincentive for actually writing a business plan, because the world has changed a lot. All right, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So today, we're really talking about the business model canvas, because the world changes so fast, all right, that we need a different way to address our business models, to come up with new ones. So here's what's changed. I'm going to click to this one right here. This is a very interesting book if nobody's ever read it, all right, and it talks about the blue ocean strategy. Now, this ties into what I would call the long tail economy. It used to be that the only way that you could go ahead and be a successful business if you had a mass market product, and you could sell out to the masses, because you had an immense amount of expense just to start that business, that you had to sell millions of them on volume just to try to make this up. Right? That's not the case today. All right? Today, you can buy a 3D printer and make a one-off type of a solution for somebody, all right? The world travels much faster today than it used to, okay? So these are some of the things that changed. So what the blue ocean strategy is really talking about is saying, don't be in a market, all right? And this is key to what we're going to talk about today. Don't be in a market where you have a lot of competitors who do exactly the same thing as you. Because what happens when you're in that kind of a market? You're a commodity. And how do you compete in a commodity market? Price, all right? Not a good place to be. There are lots of things that you can do, minor little tweaks to a business. Now, I'm not trying to say, listen, I want to open up a photography business. Maybe Steve's telling me I shouldn't open that up. I'm sitting there saying, that's fine. But if you can operate that slightly differently by any one of these millions of tweaks that we'll talk about here today that are associated with this business model canvas, you, in fact, carve out your own piece of blue ocean. Does that make sense? All right, so going back here. So here's what's changed. In the old days, we had reasoning skills that I would call causal. These are what I call the general. So let me spin you a yarn. I think you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about here. If you're a general and your objective is to take that particular hill, there is a lot of effort that goes into that. It's not simply charging up the hill. You have to make sure the manpower is there. You have to make sure the logistics are there, so that feed, your food and ammunition, all those things exist out there. You have to come up with a plan of who's going to do what. Then you gather everybody at the bottom of the hill. You assault the hill. And here's the problem. That used to work really great if the enemy was entrenched at the top of the hill in some, fortress or something like that. But today, it's a very mobile world. The enemy, all he has to do is move from one hill to another, and when you get to the top of the hill, and guess what happens? There's nobody there to fight, right? Now what happens, all that time and energy that you spent and all those logistics functions are wasted efforts, okay? That used to work because that was the same way business was. It took a lot of energy, a lot of activity just to go ahead and make, that assault to happen. It took a lot of expenses to do that. Today, things happen at lightning fast pace. So today, what's valued is what we call effectual reasoning. And if you think about effectual reasoning, it's like the explorer. If you think about Christopher Columbus, okay, Christopher Columbus was commissioned to open up the spice trades. He got an armada of ships. He sailed across the ocean. Guess what happened? He ran into this giant landmass that prevented him essentially from getting to the Spice Islands. Now, if this was a business plan, and he has his objective to just get that spice trades, he'd have made a left turn and he'd have continued to sail around the coastline until he eventually got to the Pacific Ocean, and then continued his sailing and eventually got to the Spice Islands. But instead, he stopped and he looked at the indigenous people and he said, my goodness, they got gold everywhere here. I think my employer would be just as happy if I brought home a ship full of gold. And he changed his plan because he got to a point, he made an observation, and he pivoted on what he was going to go ahead and do. He never opened up the spice trades, all right, but he did bring back a hold full of gold and a lot of other kinds of things. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. So you may have this idea that says, I want to go down this path, but halfway down that path, you will see new opportunities that happen. So this means certain things have changed. Because in the old days, I would get funded to reach my objective. And if I had run into this landmass and this explorer, I would have probably run out of money, food and supplies before I got there because it was an unanticipated roadblock, right? A hurdle in my way that I might not have been able to get there. That business would have failed. Today, it changes. And these are what I call the causal principles. Used to be, I have an expected return. I want to go after the best possible market. All right? Maybe I do a competitive analysis to understand where I'm at. I want to avoid surprises because I want to predict the future. But today, we're talking about effectual reasoning. So go back to that Explorer example. It's about what the first thing I'll call is affordable loss. Because I know that if I blow my entire wad to get to the other side of the ocean, like that Explorer, and I have nothing left, I will not be able to pivot to take a new opportunity. So the first thing is, how much can I afford to lose on this next step? Because it's really about preservation, okay, of the capital that I have, right? So I don't want to spend it all right up front. I want to dole it out because I may need some more of that a little bit later. Okay, so the first principle that's changed is this affordable loss. So it's not figuring out expected return and just go for it. It's saying, let's just take baby steps and take a look at that. The other one I'll call a strategic partnership. I'd like to recount one of my mentors, all right? You probably never heard, he's not a household name, but he has a very interesting story, and I'm sure you're familiar with some of his products, okay? So his name is Ron Munz. He used to be here in Colorado Springs, and he has a software company. And he was approached by a company to develop an asset tracking piece of software. Now, just I want to put a time frame on this, okay? It is the period of time when mini computers are beginning to give way to PCs. So mini computers were very easy to track because they all appeared in a raised floor lab type of a scenario there. Once you bought it, it sat in there and we didn't have to track where it was. Now PCs came along and PCs became distributed across the company. So this company's issue was, hey, listen, I bought all these PCs, now they're distributed across my company. I need to understand what desks they're on, what software they have, what peripherals they have. Do they have a printer? Do they not? Do they have a big monitor, small monitor, whatever the case may be? And so would you like to write this software program to do this? Well, in the typical world, what would happen? He'd say, well, I'll do that for you for $100,000, let's say, and then the person would pay him, right? Then he would not have that product, and he'd be in the gig economy, as we call it today. He'd work for that, and then he'd look for the next job, and so on and so forth. But Ron was a little bit of a smart guy, and he said, listen, before I go ahead and do that, I'm going to guess that if you have that requirement, some of you may also have that requirement. He says, so he went out there and found 2 other businesses that had a similar requirement. He combined all the requirements together, and he said, listen, it's going to cost $100,000 to build this, and I'll tell you what, I'll charge you a third, and you a third, right? It's a back office program, right? It's not something that differentiates you from your competitors. So the businesses said, no problem. I will more than happy pay a third of the cost of it. He said, the caveat is that I own the software at the end, and I can do with it what I want to. I can sell it to somebody else, all right? Now, the key part is, did he follow the typical model that you see out there in Silicon Valley, raising capital to build a product to go ahead and send it? No, he had his customers not only design what functionality they had, they're on the ground. It's not something you had to speculate and do it and put it out there and hope it stuck. But the customer who was going to use it defined the product, they paid for you to develop the product, and then you owned it. Okay, that's kind of the new world that we live in. Okay, it's called strategic partnerships with your customers to be able to do that. And the other one is being able to leverage contingencies. Okay, so rather than try to predict the future, we want to shape the future. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put something out there, and then what we're going to do is we're going to try to align all the assets to try to make that work. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we start getting into some of the blocks. So you see how the world has kind of changed quite a bit. And because of that, the business model is going to change. Think about Amazon's business model. It's changing right now rather drastically, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we kind of go on there.